It was a late Friday night, and I'd just finished up a long day at work. Exhausted, I ordered an Uber to take me home. The app showed a driver named Paul was a few minutes away. He had 5 stars, and I figured it would be a quick, nice ride. When the car pulled up, it was an old, beat-up sedan, not the usual clean, newer models I'd come to expect, but I was too tired to care, so I slid into the back seat and greeted Paul. He didn't respond. He was a scruffy, middle-aged man with wild eyes that darted between the rearview mirror and the road. As we drove, Paul kept glancing at me through the mirror. It started as just the occasional look, but soon, it became more frequent. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his breathing seemed irregular, and the atmosphere in the car was growing tense. "Everything all right?" Paul didn't respond. Then a few minutes went by, and he finally spoke. "You ever wonder who's really driving the car?" I laughed nervously, thinking he was just being weird, but there was no humor in his tone. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, tightening his grip on the wheel, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Sometimes, it's not the driver in control. Sometimes, something else takes over." "Okay, where are you going with this?" Paul didn't answer. Instead, he turned sharply off the main road, down a dark side street that wasn't on the route. The streetlights disappeared, and I could feel my heartbeat quicken. "Hey, this isn't the way to my place. Can you please turn around?" He didn't respond, just kept driving down this narrow road. The dark road stretched ahead of us like a tunnel. I reached for my phone to check the route or call someone, but when I unlocked it, the map app suddenly closed, and the phone went black. Phones don't work out here. Panic rose in my chest. "Look, I just want to go home. Can you please take me back?" Paul's eyes flashed in the rearview mirror again, but this time, they didn't seem human, almost as if something else was looking back at me. "Home? We're going somewhere better." I grabbed the door handle, but the lock clicked. "Don't," he said, his voice now steady but threatening. "Once you're in my car, you don't get out. Not until it's over." The car picked up speed as he drove further into the darkness, and I realized I needed to do something fast. I spotted a sharp corner coming up ahead. Without thinking, I unbuckled my seatbelt and lunged forward, grabbing the wheel. The car swerved violently as we skidded off the road into a ditch. There was a loud crash, and everything went black. When I came to, the car was upside down, airbags deployed. The sound of dripping fuel echoed in the eerie silence of the night. My head was pounding, but I managed to crawl out of the wreckage. I glanced over at Paul's seat. Empty. I stumbled onto the road, looking around. No sign of him. No sound except the wind through the trees. My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket. The screen was working again. A notification from Uber popped up. "Your driver has completed the trip." Paul was gone. The car was wrecked, but the trip was marked as finished. I never found out who or what was really driving that night. All I know is that I'll never get into an Uber alone ever again. I've been driving for Uber for about a year now, mostly to make some extra cash on the side. Late night drives are usually quiet. You get the occasional drunk partier, but nothing I can't handle. I've seen it all. That night felt no different until I picked up her. It was around 1 a.m. when I got the notification. The app said the pickup location was some house out in the suburbs. The streets were empty. and the houses looked dark. When I pulled up, I noticed her standing out on the curb, a tall, thin woman in a black coat, just staring down at her phone. I rolled down the window. "Hey, you call for an Uber?" She didn't respond right away, just stood there for a moment, then looked up. Her eyes were wide, like she hadn't slept in days. Slowly, she nodded and got in the back seat without a word. "Okay, we're headed to..." I glanced down at the destination. It was an address downtown. "All right, off we go." As soon as I started driving, the atmosphere in the car got heavy. I tried to make small talk, asking her how her night was going, if she was heading home, but she just stared out the window, completely ignoring me. All right, I thought, some people are just quiet. A few minutes into the ride, I noticed something strange. She was muttering something under her breath. At first, I thought she was just talking to herself, but the longer it went on, the more disturbing it became. The words were fast, whispered, and I couldn't really make out what she was saying. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her eyes, wide and blank, staring straight ahead, but not really seeing anything. My chest tightened. "You okay back there?" Suddenly, she stopped muttering. Silence filled the car, thick and uncomfortable. Then, in a voice much clearer than before, she said, "You shouldn't have picked me up." I froze. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she just started whispering again, but louder this time. Her fingers were twitching in her lap, tapping out a rapid, irregular rhythm. Something about her was off. Really off. I checked the app. We were still about 15 minutes away from her destination. That was too long. I tried to shake it off. People get weird sometimes, but she was just drunk or high or I don't know what she was. "I think there's an issue with the app." I lied. "I might need to pull over and..." "No." Her voice cut through the air like a knife. "Keep driving." Chills ran down my spine. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. This time, she wasn't just sitting still. She was slowly leaning forward, her eyes locked onto mine, her mouth twitching into a faint, unsettling smile. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I needed to do something, anything, to get this creature out of my car. Then she spoke again, her voice soft but filled with menace. "Do you know what happens to people like you? Drivers who don't listen?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had gone dry. I was about to make an excuse to pull over when she lunged forward, grabbing the headrest of my seat with both hands. I swerved, nearly crashing into a parked car as she hissed in my ear. "It's too late. You're already a part of this." I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop on the side of the road. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice shaking. She leaned back, the strange smile still on her face. "You can't escape this," she whispered, before slowly opening the door and stepping out of my car. I watched her walk away down the dark, empty street, her figure disappearing into the night. My hands were shaking as I locked the doors and sped off, not even caring that I hadn't officially ended the ride on the app. When I got home, I checked the trip history. The destination she had entered didn't even exist. There was no trace of the address in the city. And worse, the ride wasn't recorded at all. It was like it never had happened. But I know I did it. I can still hear her whispering in my ear every time I get behind the wheel. It was late, and I was dead tired, but I needed to get home. I'd stayed longer than I expected at a friend's place and figured it was safer to grab an Uber than walk back home alone in the dark. After a few minutes of waiting, the app notified me that my driver, Roger, was arriving. His profile picture was normal enough. Middle-aged man with glasses and a friendly smile. The car pulled up, and the first thing I noticed was that it didn't match the description on the app. Instead of a silver sedan, it was an old, black SUV with heavily tinted windows. I hesitated, but I figured Uber probably hadn't updated the car's info, and exhaustion won over caution. I got in the back seat, and Roger turned around to greet me. He was smiling, but something about it felt off. His eyes were too wide, like he was forcing his expression. "Hey there, you're headed home, right?" he asked, his voice a little too enthusiastic for 1 a.m. "Yeah," I replied, trying to match his energy but feeling uneasy. We started driving, and right away, I noticed he wasn't following the usual route. I checked the map, but the app seemed to be glitching, showing us bouncing off between roads that didn't even exist. I asked him about it. "Oh, don't worry about that. I know a shortcut," he said, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. His eyes lingered on me for a second too long before turning back to the road. The shortcut led us into an industrial area, far from the city streets I was familiar with. The buildings were old, abandoned warehouses, and the streetlights were few and far between. My stomach tightened with anxiety. "I don't think this is the right way." Roger chuckled softly, but it didn't feel friendly. "You're in good hands. I've been doing this for years. Some people, they just don't know the best routes. But I do." I checked my phone again, but now the GPS signal was completely lost, and my messages weren't sending. I looked up and realized there were no other cars around, no signs of life, just the dark shapes of the warehouses passing by. I forced myself to speak. "I really think we should turn back. This doesn't feel right." His smile faded, replaced with a blank, unsettling expression. He didn't say anything, just kept driving, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. I watched as his knuckles were turning a different color, and I knew something was very wrong. I tried to discreetly unlock the door, but it was locked. Child lock, maybe. Suddenly, Roger spoke again, his voice low and controlled. "You ever wonder what happens to people who disappear? I mean, people vanish all the time, don't they? One minute they're there, the next, gone. No one knows why or how. You ever think about that?" My blood ran cold. "Please, just let me out of the car," I said, trying to sound firm but hearing the tremor in my voice. "Oh, it's too late for that. We're almost here." I could barely breathe. I tried pulling on the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were tinted and dark, I couldn't even see out of them. My mind was racing, thinking of what to do next. Then the car slowed down and turned into a narrow alley between two warehouses. He put the car in park and turned off the engine. Without warning, Roger turned around to face me, his smile stretched unnaturally wide. I like to meet new people, and I don't get many this far out. Adrenaline kicked in. I kicked at the door, slamming my fists against it, trying to break free. His expression didn't change, just that same twisted smile as he watched me panic. I kept pounding on the window, praying someone would hear me. Out of nowhere, I heard the distant hum of another car approaching. Headlights appeared at the end of the alley. Roger's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. He turned back around, started the car, and without a word, sped out of the alley and back onto the main road. I didn't say a thing the entire ride back. Neither did he. When we finally reached a busy street, he slowed the car down and unlocked the door. "You're home," he said, his voice eerily cheerful again. I scrambled out of the car, not even looking back as I ran toward a nearby convenience store. When I turned around, he was gone. I reported him to Uber that night, but the app showed no record of the ride, and his profile had disappeared. It was like Roger had never existed.